Well, welcome to the live stream on Gen X News. This is the Wednesday night new shoes. No, new shows, not new shoes. I wish I had some new shoes. I might get some new shoes after this one. That might be an omen for me to get some new shoes. My husband's like, "No, don't get new shoes." I'm actually I'm actually wearing Crocs right now because probably after this I'll go mow the lawn or something like that. But this is Gen X News show we do on Wednesday nights. A lot of times I do this on my own. But tonight, I have a guest. I have Ward Clark here, which I will bring in pretty soon. And we're going to talk about an interesting subject about trade and between China and Russia that a lot of people may not know about. But I think it's important for us to understand and also understand the strifes that we are going through. Russia and China are going through right now. We'll get into that. But before we do, of course, I always encourage everybody to subscribe to the show and support me by sharing this show out on your X platform. Go over to Rumble and subscribe. Put the link up here. Here we are. Go over to Rumble and subscribe on that channel. I'm building up there. This is, of course, being streamed right now on X, Rumble, and YouTube. But I would rather people go to Rumble over YouTube because YouTube demonetized me. Fair enough. It's their company, it's their choice. But I would rather people go over to Rumble because it tends to be the more free speech-esque of the platforms. And, you know, with less subscribers there, I get more views now than I do on YouTube. YouTube's totally throttling and hiding my stuff. I don't get the views I used to. So over to Rumble, support me there, Gen X on X. And we also stream, of course, on Tuesday nights, Ghostly Archives. And on Fridays, I tried to do the Tinfoil Hat Friday. And on Thursday, I join Emily Men's house on her show, which I only stream on X. That is called The Beast System. Now, this week has been a little bit, not this week, last week was really chaos because I was not feeling so good. I traveled to Colorado, picked up a new dog. I had all this swollen lymph nodes. Something was in Colorado that was really bugging me and it made me really, really sick. I got the dog. He's here. Emily, God bless her soul, she was doing the rowing machine. She was like rowing, trying to getting into the fitness, and she popped a rib out. So we were kind of messed up last week. There was no shows, and I apologize for that, but sometimes the universe is telling you to slow down and go and heal, and you have to do it. But I thank you guys for joining me here tonight on this channel, on X, on Rumble, on YouTube, wherever you are. My guest tonight is Ward Clark. He is a patriotic American who lives in Alaska. He writes for Red State News and is a 12-year veteran. And of course, we're going to talk about a lot of political stuff you may or may not hear on mainstream news. I'm surprised that we don't hear about this. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to bring Ward in and I'll let him introduce himself. And welcome to the show.
Thanks, Melissa.
All right.
You covered the high grounds. I'm a contributor at redstate.com, which is part of the Town Hall Media Group. Before that, for 30 years, I was actually in medical devices and biotech, and was an independent corporate consultant most of that time. So I traveled all over the world, from places as far apart as South Africa and Tokyo. And so I saw a lot of how other countries do things, and it's kind of an eye opener in a lot of ways. And now I'm here.
Did it make you appreciate America more, or did it make you see flaws in America?
A little column A, a little column B. Not so much South Africa. South Africa, I was there in 2010, and it was disintegrating even then. Now I have it on good authority because a guy I follow on YouTube who grew up there, and a lady I chanced to bump into in the San Francisco airport one time who also grew up in South Africa and fled, both of them. It's a nation in free fall. There's just nothing. It may be past the point of no return. But Japan, on the other hand, does a lot of things actually a little smarter than we do. most of our major cities, and our major cities are in the process of self-destruction. I've written on this at Red State a lot. And it's a major concern. It's one of the reasons my wife and I left the Denver area and came up here, although it's not the major reason we came up here.
Right.
But it is a factor. Now, for all the chaos in our big cities, the crime and daily videos of someone just being punched in the face at random
Yeah.
or oddball things like that. But Tokyo is a much larger city, more densely populated, and they don't have those problems. Part of that, I think, is Japan since World War II has fostered a culture of respect.
Yes.
Now, the Japanese tend to up unquestioningly obey authority figures automatically, which Americans
Right, right,
really don't
right.
do. We're not very good at that. But the main thing is Japan deals with housing, prices. Young people can move to Japan from the hinterlands to Tokyo,
Mhm.
or to Kyoto or Osaka, or the major cities in Japan, and they can find affordable housing because Japan deals with that by vertical filing. There's all of these big, tall skyscraper apartment buildings,
Right.
and some of those apartments are like broom closets. You'll have to roll up your futon so you can unfold your dining room table and eat supper at night. But they're affordable. The other thing is Japan and even China, they don't have the kind of safety net we have here. You're expected to work in most of those countries in Asia, like
Yeah.
Japan and China, or you can't. Their safety nets, such as they aren't hammocks. You're expected to produce unless you're physically or mentally incapable of doing so.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy the system we have. I've worked all my life, and the only time I didn't was on maternity leave.
Hmm.
Like, and I find it insane. Like, it's almost like it's same with the crime in the cities. It's like we're all kind of a little bit corrupt. It's like we're so like about certain things, people using like encouraging the welfare system, and these are politicians or like in the city. There doesn't have to be crime in the cities. There's a real big problem with the laws and the politics and the DAs. Like there doesn't have to be that way.
No, it doesn't. We have a fairly recent example in 1994. After the contract with America, Congress passed a fairly substantial welfare reform bill. And Bill Clinton signed it. I always will give him credit for that. A lot of other things he doesn't deserve credit for, but he did sign that bill,
Mhm.
and it put, for example, lifetime limits on how long you could be on welfare,
Yeah.
and it emphasized training and getting off of welfare rather than just laying on it forever. And income levels in some of the big cities went up after that.
Interesting.
I At the time I was working in Aurora, Colorado, and there was a young woman in a single mother, and she worked in the company. Last I knew, which was just about a year ago, she's still working for that company, and it's been over 20 years. But she told
Yeah.
me flat out she would have stayed on welfare if she'd have been able to, but she had to go get a job. And she goes, I'm doing so much better now. I make more money than I ever made on welfare. I'm
Yeah.
moving up. It's a good company to work for, and I'm proud of it.
Welfare is a huge trap. And if you get on it and you stay on it and you raise your kids on it, it's like, and they don't see you working and doing all the stuff and encouraging them to get education. It's like this cycle. And what was really sad to me to see was like a lot of welfare was, encouraging women to be single parents.
Hmm.
And that's a bad thing for society to have single
It
mothers, especially if you have boys.
it really is. Yeah, you're right. Especially for boys. Boys need father. Well, girls need fathers too. We have four
They do.
daughters, and
They
and
absolutely do.
I've been very much a father that was in their life. They're all grown now. In
Mhm.
fact, the youngest is 28. Um, but boys especially need those role models, and it's not just our cities; it's a nationwide problem. A lot of too many places they just don't have those role models anymore, and that's the problem you see with a lot of the feral youths that are in the cities. They grew up with no strong fathers. They don't know how to act. They don't know how to be
Yeah.
men. They don't know what being a man means, and we're seeing the results now.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was a started from a government thing, but it seemed like people did better pre 1960s, 1970s. Some minority figure groups were doing better economically, having their own businesses, and it's just seemed to slowly over the past 50 years fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The in 19 I want to say it was in 1940, the average urban the rate of out of wedlock births among urban black families was in the single digits.
Wow.
Now I
Oh
think
my
it's 70
God.
or 80%.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You watch films from say Harlem in 1936. Someone sent me one a while back. He said, "Here's Harlem, night 1936. The men are all wearing suits and ties and hats, and the women are equally nicely dressed. You didn't see any pants hanging down
Well, you
off
see that
people.
everywhere. Like I used to work at Costco in Canada, and I can't tell you how many people show up in their pajamas looking like like a wreck just to grocery shop, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, "Can you not put a nice pair of pants and brush your hair and take a shower? Like,
And
what's
even
wrong with
some
you?"
jeans, even some
Yes.
jeans would be good. We see it occasionally up here. My wife and I have a place, a lodge about 20 miles north of here that we go for lunch every Saturday, and I'm just biased enough to my little community that I don't see the locals, or at least anybody I know as locals, and we know a lot of people. It's a small
Mhm.
town. When you see the kids coming in pajama pants, we all go behind our hands and go, "Yeah, they're tourists." So of course, we get a lot of, and the state, frankly, realizes a lot of its income from the tourism, so we don't mind the
Right.
tourists really.
So when it comes to, because we're gonna get into China and Russia and obviously Alaska is probably affected by Russia, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you see it differently than other Americans do because of your proximity to Russia, and most Americans don't think about that.
Well, no, they don't, and there's an element of that to it. It's been fairly recently. Again, Russia was trailing their bear bombers, the Tupolev bears, right down our coast, just outside the international limit. They've been doing that since the 60s, and those bears,
Mhm.
they've got an enormous range. They can stay up for I think 12 or 16 hours without refueling, and they can carry nuclear tip cruise missiles. They're old, but like our B-52, they're still a fairly effective platform, and they just
Mhm.
like trolling us by flying them down the coast. They're not going to do anything. There's
Right.
F-22s at Elmendorf down by Anchorage that escort them down the coast, and if one of those made a hostile move, it'd be suicide. And the Russians know that.
Right.
There's a joke on Russian naval aviation during the Cold War. I understand the crews of those bears, the bears' role was maritime reconnaissance. They would go out and find the American fleet so that the backfires could come in with anti-ship missiles and hack away at them. But the bear was, it's a propeller-driven airplane. It's kind of slow. It's kind of
Mhm.
ungainly. It's not very maneuverable. And the joke was that their message when they found the American fleet was they would say American fleet location so and so, Das Vidania Rodina, which means goodbye fatherland, because they were going to get shot
Wow.
down as soon as the American detected them.
So
And
no, go ahead, finish.
no,
Sorry.
it's a little bit of the military people, no matter where they're from, are big on dark humor.
So I always understood that I didn't realize until I started reading in about 2016, 2017, that Russia has been for decades doing a lot of development up in the Arctic area. And I always felt it curious that Canada wasn't like heavily up there. And I know we wanted to get into that sort of trade route development that they were doing with icebreakers and stuff like that. Um, how long has Russia been developing that sort of North Sea trade route?
The icebreakers have been exploring ways along the northern coast since the 50s. I think they've been trying,
Yeah.
and it's not the entire year they can keep that route open. But as far as Russia's push into Siberia, this has been going on for some time. I couldn't give you exactly how many years. I became aware of it in the 80s that they were starting to push up and develop. There's oil and gas in Siberia. There's gold,
Right.
frankly, which Russia is desperate for hard currency. Russia is basically a gas station with some nuclear weapons. Their
Right.
primary source of income is selling natural gas to Europe and maybe selling a few weapons on the side to various bad actors around the world. Uh, but there are rare earth minerals in Siberia, and not to mention just timber. Timber is a valuable resource. A lot of people forget that, but
Hmm.
wood is a very valuable, especially building wood, which oddly enough, as heavily forested as Alaska is, we have to import most of our building wood because most of our trees don't get big enough to produce
Hmm.
building lumber.
Yeah,
We
just having a look at the Arctic shipping routes here, and it's kind of wow. There's a lot of things that could
Yeah.
go wrong.
Well, there
Wow.
and Russia's main port on their east coast is at Vladivostok, and to go up to the Arctic, you have to go. You see that little narrow strait that you have to pass between Alaska and
Hmm.
and Russia. Uh, Everybody makes fun of our Sarah Palin for the "I can see Russia from my house" joke
Hmm.
that was
Hmm.
actually Tina Fey, and but there are places in the Aleutians where you can, on a clear day, you can see the Russian coast. There's just not a lot of distance there.
No.
Alaska is the term I use. Alaska is the crown of the Pacific. Billy Mitchell, back in the 1930s, said, "Whoever controls Alaska controls the Pacific." He said it's the most strategic piece of real estate on the planet.
Now I know
And
why
right now, we
America wanted
control
it.
Alaska.
I was gonna say now I know why America was like, "Hey, we want that."
Yeah, and I don't think they foresaw that at the time. Well, for one thing, they never foresaw long range reconnaissance and patrol aircraft that could
Right.
reach out from places like Elmendorf and fly to Guam and then turn around and come back. But they did see some, Seward, who were grateful to him for pushing through the purchase of what they called Seward's ice box at the time, because of course nobody thought Alaska was going to amount to anything until I think 10 years later when they found
Hmm.
gold up
Oh
along the
yeah.
Yukon, and that started a gold rush from British Columbia and from Yukon over Chilkoot Pass into eastern
Hmm.
Alaska, where a lot of people died walking over
Oh
Chilkoot
yeah.
Pass.
I've been on Vancouver Island to some of the old gold rush towns that were built up in the early 1900s. And
Yeah.
I've gone and stayed in the old buildings, and I was like, "Woo, that would have like we drove there in an SUV. I couldn't imagine doing like horse and buggy or wagon. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
wow.
There's
Wow."
there's still a fair amount of gold mining. There's some done out by this really is the name of a village in eastern Alaska. It's called Chicken. There's some up by Delta Junction. Various places around the state. There's still gold
Mhm.
mining going on, and you can. It's a tourist dodge. People will say you can pan for gold, and they'll rent you a pan and show you how to do it.
So, does Russia's invasion of Ukraine, does that have anything to do with their trade routes? Is there any connection for
Well,
them moving in on that?
it is because one thing Russia's always had trouble with is warm water ports. Their ports are all in the Arctic Ocean, Murmansk and Leningrad. It's not Leningrad anymore. But they really want more Black Sea ports, and taking
Mhm.
Odessa gave them one. And of course, Ukraine objected to them taking the Crimea, and people have been fighting over the Crimea. This is nothing new. This has been going on since the
It's old.
1700s.
Yeah.
Uh, there's the old joke from the movie The Princess Bride: never get involved in a land war in Asia, and that's because there's so many of them and they go on for so long.
Right.
Russia and Ukraine have been contending with each other forever. Even when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of bad feeling there. When the Germans rolled in to Ukraine in 1941, a lot of people greeted them as liberators until
Oh,
the
they
SS
got
came on and
they
started
got
rounding up Jews and actors and those folks.
I think a lot of different countries saw Hitler as like a hero figure. And I'm not anyone I am not, pitching Hitler that way, but I think he was seen that way by a lot of people at the time.
Yeah, and people didn't understand all that was going on. And once
Yes.
they did, attitudes changed fairly quickly. And I think when the Red Army came back into Ukraine, that they were the ones that were being greeted as liberators, and justly so.
Yeah.
Although Stalin really
And
wasn't a heck of a lot better.
and then that switched too. So
Yeah,
I don't know
but
what's worse.
I
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
interesting thing about the Ukraine war is there's an old saying in military circles, and I repeated it a lot myself when I was during my time in the Army and Army Reserves. We're always training to fight the last war. And Ukraine is not doing that. Ukraine is, because they're a much smaller country, and the Russian army has always been a blunt instrument. They just bury you in tanks and men, and that's
Hmm.
always been their tactic since World War II.
Right.
Um, but if the Ukrainians are coming up with some interesting ways, they've sunk, I think, 2 Russian ships with drones.
Interesting.
Just a slightly scaled up version of something you could probably buy at Best Buy, and they stick a big charge on it and fly. A guy's got a controller and he flies it out and torches it off, and there goes a guided missile frigate to the bottom. They're finding
Hmm.
new and innovative ways to fight on the cheap, and it's very interesting to watch.
It's interesting, but I think their population's getting slaughtered.
It
The
is. It
population of
is.
males, which is
Yeah,
which is considering all the population problems we are all having, as you were saying before we came on, that's not a good thing for Ukraine, the
and
Ukrainian people.
there's the problem with all the money we're sending them is that Ukraine frankly, is one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. And
Mhm.
you're seeing an awful lot of video of Ukrainian government officials on big party vacations and
Mhm.
touring nightclubs and so forth while their
Z
troops are out there getting
Yeah.
their butts shot off.
Zelensky's wife wearing designer clothes and
Hmm.
bling, bling, bling.
Yeah, and he makes a show of showing up in Congress in an olive drab T-shirt.
Oh, yeah. I know, I was just like, "Wow, is he ever playing the part?" It was like a little, America's really one of the few countries that the taxpayers just send money to everybody. Nobody's sending money to us. Like, what's going on here?
No, no. When we have a natural disaster, we're on our own. We take care of it. But when that tsunami in Indonesia a few years back, the first ship to show up was an American aircraft carrier task group, and
Yeah.
some on the left were going, "Oh, we sent a warship," and they said, "We sent an aircraft carrier that has more water purification capacity than most cities. It has a
Mhm.
complete hospital. It has
Yeah,
all these search and rescue aircraft." I said, "Yeah, we sent a carrier. It's the ideal
exactly.
thing for the job. They aren't just
Exactly.
all about sinking other ships."
No, and they're self-contained and self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, they can even, if they're in a port, they can even run normally when ships are in port, and I know this from some friends I've had that were squids, Navy people. They generally draw their power from the dock. They hook
Mm.
up the ship to electricity off the dock so they can shut the tea kettle in the back of the carrier down there, the reactor. But I understand they can do it the other way too. They can supply electricity ashore if there's need for it.
Now, I was looking at the amount. I might actually share my screen here in 1 second. Let me see. I'm going to pop this open. There we are. I was looking. Let's see. Da, 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 da. We got that? Is that it? Yeah. This is really interesting because I was looking at how many icebreakers that Russia has
Mm-hmm.
compared to Canada and United States, and it's astounding
Oh yeah, yeah.
how much
Well,
development they have.
if you look at a map, they've got so much Arctic coast,
Mhm.
probably on a par with Canada. But the United States, as far as ice locked ports, we've just got northern Alaska.
Yeah.
So that explains our relative lack of icebreakers. We don't have to keep channels open to Barrow or now they call it, what do they call it now? Uktiavik is what Barrow. They went back to the native Yupik name for Barrow.
Oh,
So
interesting.
there's a lot of that to it. But our merchant shipping fleet is shrunk dramatically. The United States is very heavily dependent on foreign ships to carry cargo. Part of that is because of a rather stupid law called the Jones Act, which requires any shipping between American ports to be carried out by an American flagged ship. And
Hmm.
that was a sop to the Maritime Merchant Marine and their union. But that means that if a ship comes from China with a bunch of consumer goods, as happens every week, uh, and docks at Los Angeles and offloads half of the goods, and the other half, say, are going to San Francisco or Tallahassee or wherever, they have to load that onto an American flag ship. The Chinese ship can't just pull away from the dock and go up to San Francisco and drop the rest of its load. They have to transship it to an American ship, and it's inefficient, and
I
it's
was going to say that sounds like a lot of work, extra
yeah,
work.
and it's just kind of baffling that that law has, nothing's been done to repeal that yet.
So I mean, they have a lot of icebreakers. They have a lot of ice, but
Hmm.
they're expanding. Now, I heard that this sort of North Sea trade route and the other ones really cut trade travel like in half almost, like compared to
It
say the
does.
Suez Canal.
It does. To go from Vladivostok to Murmansk, if you can go up on along the Arctic coast, it saves you thousands of miles of shipping because they have to go down around, to around India, through the Indian Ocean, up through the Suez
Hmm.
Canal, up through the Med, and then up all the way up the European coast.
And I've seen
It's
videos of ships in that Suez Canal, and it looks tricky.
Yeah, it's frighteningly narrow. It's an old canal. The British made that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what year it was, but I mean, it was before World War I, I think, because
Yeah.
part of the Gallipoli campaign involved, grabbing the mouth of the Suez Canal.
Now, how does okay? So China is teaming in on this. Like, well, you've got this BRICS. The world is changing. It's changing into something so different. People are trying to drop the American dollar, but now China comes into this where I'm seeing that Russia and China are kind of teaming up for this sort of trade. Are they
They
like trying
are.
to, what are they like? Yeah, I'll just let you go with
Well,
that.
both of them have things the other needs, and they're facing similar problems. Uh, China imports a great deal of food, and they import what food they do grow themselves. They import a great deal of fertilizer. There are not
Oh,
many good sources for fertilizer in China. Potash, a lot of that comes from. I'm gonna look it up, so I'm sure I have this right.
and that would be, I mean, they have such a huge population, a huge older population as opposed to younger population,
They
which is not a good
do,
thing.
but yes, it's shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Canada is one of the bigger countries, but the number one country for potash production is Canada. Number two is Russia.
It's Russia.
So they have fertilizer that Chinese desperately needs. They're starting to cooperate militarily. We're fairly certain there's some technology exchange going on back and forth between the two. It would be in both countries' interests to do so. Uh, Xi in China has managed to grab more power into his own hands than anyone since Chairman Mao. While Putin has effectively made himself, Tsar Vladimir the First. They're
Right.
two strong men, basically dictators in charge of dying countries that have nuclear weapons, and that just seems a very bad combination.
I know I've seen like Russia really trying to push people to have families
Mm-hmm.
and and this is something they've been aware of for a while. They're not just suddenly going, oh, they've been aware of population issues for decades.
Yeah, it's not a new thing, and it's not for China. It's not for Japan, frankly, either. Japan may be worse than China or Russia
Don't
as far as the
don't you think
demographics.
it's weird that these globalists, these Western globalists want this? Like they keep preaching depopulation as if it's going to be a piece of cake and really easy. Like I just heard what's his name, Larry Fink, the other day talking about how educating women and depopulating is going to be a
Well,
good thing.
they always operate on the assumption that they're going to be among the people who are left enjoying this depopulated world that supposedly will be all clean and pristine,
Mhm.
instead of the vast majority of the population, when the population was at that level, were out there at the ox bone plow subsistence farming level. Um, to maintain a technological society, you need a certain size of a population base, and we're probably past the minimum. But you
Mhm.
don't want to let that drop too far. You need people. You need an industrial society to maintain a modern lifestyle,
It's
and
right,
that
and
that
it's kind of like reverse. um, compound interest. It's like once you hit a point, it's just going to spiral out of
Yeah,
control where it's like a pyramid. The pyramid's not like this, the aging up top. It's like this now. And if
yeah.
it goes like this, you're in
Then we're
really
in
big
trouble.
trouble. We're in really
Uh,
big trouble.
I think it was Mark Levin that said the future belongs to those who show up for it. And increasingly, Russia and China and most of Western Europe, as far as ethnic Europeans go, Germans, French, they're just not showing up. They're choosing not to have children. Americans
I
are
wish I
doing a
had
little
more
better.
kids. I
We
wish I
we
had
have
more kids than when I did.
we have four. Well, one we adopted one, but I think we did our part with four kids.
Absolutely. It's it's just if you look at the modern people, it's I don't know if it's some kind of narcissistic, it's pop culture, but they've really grabbed hold of themselves. Me,
Well, and
as opposed to a community that has to keep growing. They don't understand that their prime purpose here is to procreate.
yeah, heavily urbanized cultures tend to do that.
Mhm.
One of the characteristics of Rome as the Western Empire was declining was a drop in birth rate. Even that far back, almost 2,000 years ago, 1,800, 100 years ago. Uh, Rural populations that do a lot of subsistence, where most of the people are basically peasants, subsistence farmers. They have big families because they need the labor. And trust me,
Mhm.
my dad was a farmer. Even in the modern era, if you grew up on the farm, you're expected
Mhm.
to work on the farm. And I helped
Yeah.
deliver calves. I helped, I walked beans. I did all those things starting from the time I was driving a tractor when I was 10 years old. And I was the youngest of five. But urbanized populations tend to have smaller families, and, one, two, three children at most. And those are very broad strokes, mind you. But we had a neighbor just to the north of my folks' place that had they had 14 kids.
Wow.
You won't see that
You
in
you
a
see
city.
that. You might see 2.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people with just 1. I was an only child, and I only had 1 child. I wish I'd had, like, at least 2. But you see 2, although the town that I used to live in Canada, you would see 3 and 4 sometimes because it was very family orientated, but don't go to the city. You'd be lucky. I have so many friends who don't even have any children at all. Like, it's kind of like, "What? You didn't have any?" And they're like, "No, I got my cat." And, I mean, fair enough, but I don't think they understand what it means.
Well, my concern about that is I've known people who chose, I know a married couple and they're a little older than I am. My friend Rick and his wife, when they first married, probably 40 years ago, decided they would not have kids. They'd be free to travel, as they please, and now they're in their 70s, and all I can think of, and I won't say this to my friend because it's insensitive, but I always want to know what happens when one of you dies and the
Or when you
other's
get
all
old.
alone.
Or you get old. Who's gonna
Yeah.
help you go to the I mean, some people have to go to nursing homes, but who's gonna help you?
I mean, my parents. Now, granted, my parents were in their 90s, and they died 8 months apart because very elderly. They were married for 71 years. People at that level often do go very quickly,
Mm,
one after the other.
yes.
But the only thing that kept my mom going for the 8 months that she lasted after dad died was, her kids and her grandkids and her great
Yeah.
grandkids. She still had this huge family that surrounded her, even though she was in a nursing home. And her problems were physical and not mental. So she was,
Right, right. Well,
and she in her last months, that was really good for her. But
it's
these people they don't have that.
it's kind of interesting because I was reading you're saying that Russia's gonna need the population, and they have a goal to increase I don't know, I think it's like 700% by 2035,
Mhm.
their whole ice breaking passage operation up there. Do you think that's doable? Like, how do you think what's their plans?
I'm skeptical. Putin has been trying tax incentives and various things to try and get Russian people to start having babies, and they're just not doing it. I'm not sanguine about Russia's future. There's a guy on YouTube, a very young guy who reads an awful lot of history, and he's done several good videos on Russia. And
Mhm.
he is presents a fairly compelling argument for Russia and China, both being past the point of no return. Both of these huge nations aren't sustainable with the population they're going to have 50 years from now, and they will likely break up. China, for much of its history, wasn't, you know, China. It wasn't a country. It was,
Right.
several small territories ruled basically by regional warlords. Some of them were, pretty nasty, and some of them were just tolerable. And Russia, wasn't much different for a lot of its time. And Russia had, Mongols and other invading armies sweeping across the steppes every few years. And he is of the opinion that that might be what happens again. That China
Uh,
and Russia will balkanize. They'll break up into
they'll
several small
balkanize.
republics. He might be right.
That could leave them pretty vulnerable.
It could
If
leave them
there's
very
a
vulnerable.
if there's a European world order
Yeah.
about.
But the thing is, vulnerable to whom? They are
Mm.
the powers in Asia, and Russia is still a major player in
I
European
I wouldn't
geopolitics.
be surprised if America is itching to get into Russia. They
The, well,
seem like everybody wants to, don't they want to? Isn't that the goal, to get Russia one day because everybody fails? I don't
well,
know.
having the I was in the army during the Cold War, and all of
Hmm.
our I mentioned we trained to fight the last war. All of our
Hmm.
training was assuming the Russians were going to drive 10,000 tanks through the Fulda Gap, and we were going to have to try and keep them from getting to the
Hmm.
English Channel. Uh,
Hmm.
it'd be a lot different now. Our tech, even in the mess our military is in right now, manpower wise, our technology is still, light years ahead of what Russia has right now.
Hmm.
They talk about, oh, we have hypersonic missiles. Well, they fired one. We haven't seen any more. Um, and technology is a huge force multiplier. There are
Yeah.
the latest things the U.S. military is dealing with. The Navy is dealing with a thing they're calling what do they call it? A skate. It's basically a drone submarine that's about the size of a small frigate or corvette that is programmable, and you can take it off of a Russian port or a Chinese port and park it in the mud on the bottom. And when a ship with a certain engine signature goes over, the drone pops up and follows it, and
Hmm.
on command goes in and punches a big hole in it and sinks it.
Right.
The F-22s, they're developing basically drone clouds that will accompany the F-22 and carrying weapons, and the pilot can just kind of hang back, and those F-22s are damn near invisible. And the F-22 pilot can kind of hang back and control a half dozen of
So
these drone, you know, weapons
why
carrying drones that can do air to air, and they have some AI capacity, so you don't have
why
to
is
be.
it that Russia can't catch up? Like, why are they behind? Like,
I
is there
I
an
think
explanation?
I think there's a couple of reasons, and this is just my speculation, but there's still an awful lot of the attitude from the old Soviet era.
Mhm, mhm.
They pretend to pay us, so we pretend to work. It's not a system that encouraged innovation, at least not unless national survival was at stake. They managed to produce a few good things in World War II. The T-34 tank, for example, which by the end of the war was already obsolete, but in 1941 it was a pretty good tank. And China's the same way. China's vaunted, they talk a good game about their tech, but their
Mhm.
electric cars, the batteries are exploding. They've got fields of electric cars. You can go online and find overhead satellite overheads, or even just direct pictures people have taken. There's whole fields of electric cars that they made and can't sell. So they just park them in big fields, and they transfer them to a holding company and count them as sales. So much of Chinese culture is faked. When the
What
Olympics
it
were over
is.
there,
What a
they went.
waste.
They went. I've seen videos before the Olympics came to Beijing. There's all these brown hillsides where the trees and plants have died because China's environment is a god awful mess. They went through and sent crews to paint the brush and trees green so that the visiting people would come in and see these beautiful green hills in the distance. And they were painted. It was all fake. China isn't a country. They're a country. They have through their history they've been a nation not of great ideas but of great momentum.
Right. And they have a massive army, though. I mean, they probably have a high male population because of their
Oh yeah,
one-child policy.
yeah.
But
Uh,
is it a good army? Like, is it efficient?
well,
Is it threatening?
that's hard to say because we don't have. I don't think we have a lot of good intel on how good the individual Chinese soldier is. But China is, if they get into a major conflict, they're going to practice accuracy by volume. They're just going to pour a
Mhm.
lot of people and a lot of fire out. I think that's their model.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, there was some concern that China was looking rather enviously at Siberia, and that China and Russia might get. And a lot of people don't appreciate that there have been armed scraps over the border out in that part of the country, northern China and southern Siberia. In a lot of places out there, the border isn't really well defined,
Interesting. It's a
and
little bit
people
blurry.
and it's a militarized border, like most borders
So,
are. Matter of fact, you mentioned you growing up in Canada. The United States and Canada are really unique. For over
they
200
are.
years, we have a 3,000-mile border that's completely demilitarized.
I know. We're
It's
like,
almost unheard
I've
of in
never
human
heard
history.
of. I know. I've never heard of it. That with obviously, I don't know what's going on, but I don't know. Canada
Oh
and America have a lot in common, though.
yeah, and Europe is getting that. Western Europe has become that way since the Cold War ended. I was over there in '96, '97 for Operation Joint Endeavor.
Right.
And we went down. I took my family down to Strasbourg, which is in Alsace, on the French side of the Rhine,
Mhm.
and we just
Mhm.
drove across the Rhine on a bridge, and the border posts, check posts, were all boarded up. There
Oh,
was nothing there. You just drove across, and you were in France.
wow. It
My
used to be
dad's
like that.
brother, yeah, my dad's brother was still alive. He was in the 101st Airborne in World War
Wow.
II. He jumped into Eindhoven. He was at Bastogne. He got hurt really badly right after they'd crossed the river into Germany, and he didn't
Mhm.
remember a lot because he had brain damage from an 88
Wow.
fragment. But he did
I know.
remember. He said he shook his head. I remember him saying, he goes, "We lost so many men trying to cross that damn river,
Wow.
and now you can
It's
just drive
crazy.
across it."
You can just drive across. I know when my grandmother was young, she used to be able to just walk over from Canada to
Mm-hmm.
United States, like in Montreal in that area, right? Probably from New Brunswick to Maine or whatever it is. Nothing. She just walk
Oh
over.
yeah, yeah.
Before
When I
nine
was a young
eleven, I
man,
could just use my driver's license. I didn't
yeah,
need a passport. It was
when
way
I was a
different
young
before
man, that's how we
9/11.
did it. We went up to Canada
Yeah.
to do some fishing. I grew up in Iowa, and so we would drive up into
Mhm.
Minnesota and go up sometimes across into Canada to do some fishing. Now you have to show your
Yeah.
passport.
Now you
It's
have to show a
changed.
passport and get frisked and yeah, they
Yeah,
do a
we
big
we came
scan
up.
of your car.
We drove the Alaska Highway when we moved up here. The COVID thing was still going on, and we got to the border in Montana at that crossing point, and it took us about 3 hours because we had a truck and a trailer, and they said, well,
Right.
technically we can make you unload the trailer so we can inspect it, but they didn't. And I was carrying some firearms, which all
You're
of them were
lucky that
legal
they yeah,
legal for
but
me
if
to
you
carry
took
through.
them they were legal for you to carry through?
Yeah, yeah, all the
Oh,
ones
because
I
you weren't staying? Okay, cool.
well, my yeah, we were going home basically, but all my stuff that isn't legal in Canada, I had taken up as check baggage on the airplane.
Oh,
So,
okay, cool. I was gonna say because
but
if,
I
I've
had
known people
some
arrested who
I
had a
had some
gun
side
in
by
their
side
car.
double shotguns and some things like that are perfectly legal in Canada, and they just want you to
Okay.
declare them as you come
Well,
through.
you never know with Trudeau and what he's making illegal now. I'm
Well,
surprised they
that's
can
what
have water guns.
the Mounties at the border said. They gave us all the restrictions of the day for COVID, and said, tomorrow it might be different, but we had 4 days to get through Canada and back into Alaska to drive that Alcan, and that's a
Wow.
pretty long drive.
It's
And
massive.
and they told us, don't, you can't go into a restaurant. You have to get drive through. When you buy gas, you have to pay at the pump. Well, on the Alaska Highway, there's a lot of places out there that are still using old mechanical gas pumps. There's no way to pay at the pump. You have to go inside. But the
They're
first gas station we
ridiculous.
came to was in Calgary, and we needed gas,
Mhm.
so we got off the highway. And I walked, and I had my card, and I looked at the pump, and it says U.S. customers must come inside. And I'm
Oh
like,
my god.
I went inside, and the guy on the counter said, "Yeah, they have some issue with their bank. They have to manually swipe the card inside in the reader." And he said, "I said the Mounties at the border told us this," and he goes, "Yeah, nobody cares. Once you get past the border, nobody cares." I said, "Well, can I buy
That's
some all
funny.
dressed chips then? Because I can't get those in the states."
Oh, that's funny.
And
Well, that's funny. It's like
well,
the
a lot of so much of that was theater.
of course it was. Of course, most of Trudeau is theater
Yeah,
and bad budgeting, and he's pretty. Speaking of China, there's a China lover for you.
I'm loving his what's the guy's name that's the conservatives standard
Oh,
bearer right now.
oh, right, Pierre.
Pierre.
Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, I love that guy. He could be Canada's Justin Millet, I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. It'll be great. So I'm gonna weave back to what the benefit of Russia and China and developing those trade routes are. Like, does it benefit both countries? Will it save them? Will they be able to depend on technology to help them?
I'm doubtful about that. The only thing that's going to bring their demographic problem back up is for them to start having kids, and the frankly the best way they could do that would be to decentralize their population, get more people out in the countryside farming, uh,
Oh,
and then they would
that's
have to
they would
build.
have
But
to.
they're fairly China and China especially. If you go
Well,
outside the
that's
big cities in China, the people are still living like in the 17th century.
well,
Huts with dirt floors and
I
a community well pump that you have to crank by
yeah.
hand.
I think like there's you see how a centralized power could make stuff happen, but then over time you see how the weaknesses in a centralized
Mm-hmm.
power and that one ruled leader can't think of all the things and ideas that you need,
Yeah,
and
you
they can't
can't
be
force
innovative. You
people.
can't have all the kids.
Yeah, you can coerce people to do a lot of things, but you can't force them to have kids.
Wow.
And I
Why do
don't
you
see how
think we're
either
not
country
having
can come
kids?
back from that brink. And
Why do
frankly,
you
the
think
United
that
States is facing a similar problem.
yeah, why do you think that happened? Why what happened culturally that shifted? Is it urbanization, modernization?
Urbanization is a big part of it. Just like I said, urban families tend to have fewer kids. Part of it is economics. They're both rather poor countries, frankly,
Mhm.
and China makes a big show of its wealth in some of the cities, but most of the population, lives on, I think it's between $3,000 and $5,000 a year equivalent. Uh,
Wow.
those aren't conducive to having lots of kids if you're
Right.
struggling to feed them. Now, people on farm plots can. Well, my mother grew up on a farm in Iowa during the
Right.
Depression, and as she always put it, well, we didn't have much money, but we always had plenty to eat. But the
Right.
people in the urban communities
So,
can't say that.
also the encouragement of women to get degrees and be in the workforce
Hmm.
and put off being pregnant, I would see that as an issue. I was always encouraged to do that when I was young, and my grandmother's generation, you got married and had children.
Yeah.
Even though she did work, they still encouraged them to get married. That's why she had the baby. That's why the baby boomers happened,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Trust me, I know. Yeah, my parents got married when dad was 23 and mom was 18, and at
Yeah.
19 she had my oldest sister, and kept until they wanted six kids. They ended up only with five.
Wow. Yeah,
But
it's it feels like we're kind of brainwashed in a way. And I don't think it's necessarily all meant to be bad, but I feel like we were encouraged to think that family and having lots of kids or having that support system was bad. And I kind of, now that I'm older, I'm like, I kind of feel cheated.
yeah, it's there's no it's something there's no substitute for. Um, the other bonds, right after our dad died, I was talking. I have one brother and three sisters. Well, two sisters now. We lost a sister to cancer a couple of years ago.
Sorry to hear that.
Um, but we talked. My brother and I, after dad died, spent about an hour. He lives back in Minnesota now, and I live up here in Alaska. But we spent about an hour on the phone talking about dad and how we remembered him. And we realized that we're both the men we are because we had a strong father,
Right.
and he was always there. He was, he was this. we were having to get used to this empty place where there used to be, this
Mhm.
giant once lived. He wasn't a giant physically. He was 5'4" and maybe weighed
By his
130 pounds,
presence.
but his
Yeah.
presence
Yeah.
was always so strong. He was always confident. He always seemed to know the right answer.
Hmm.
And
Dad knows best.
yeah, and he's been gone 5 years, and I'm still getting used to the idea that now I'm the old man, and I have kids and grandkids coming to me wanting to know things. And I spent a lot of time
That's
thinking, well, what would
amazing.
Dad have said about that?
Yeah, and it's sad that this modern world that we live in still thinks that we can do population reduction and everything's going to be peachy. Like I said, I just heard that crazy psychopath Larry Fink. Just they keep pushing it, and they said, they think that having more children will be the disaster. And even Elon Musk is warning them, like we're in a bad position here.
Yeah,
Especially once the baby boomers go and
yeah,
start declining
and
and retiring,
and I'm in the
it's a
youngest
mess.
cohort of the baby
Yeah,
boomers, and look at me, clearly
yeah.
not. I'm
Well,
getting old.
who's going to do all the work? Who's going to There's not enough people once baby boomers start retiring. That's why I came here and they hired me right away. I just
Hmm.
got a job. They were like they're desperate for people because baby boomers are retiring
Well,
and they're
they've
not
been,
working
yeah,
and they can't get skilled workers.
and that's another problem. Our education system has gone completely out of whack, and part of the problem is our education system. We went for a long time through this idea that every kid should go to college, and they were lowering standards to get the right kinds of
Yeah.
kids into college. The right combination of skin tone and plumbing.
Mhm.
Uh,
The
instead
DEI
of
crowd.
keeping instead of keeping the standards the same for everybody, regardless of any of those things. Um, but this every kid, and then the government's involvement in funding and financing education, guaranteed student loans, and all the grants. When you pour money into a system, it's inflationary, whether that be the nation's
Mhm.
economy or the university system. And it also encouraged them. A university gets paid the same amount for a student who's taking an underwater ethnic dog polishing degree as they do someone that's studying software engineering.
The lesbian dance
Yeah,
degree.
but it's a lot less expensive to teach the studies degrees because all you need
Yeah.
is a couple of nuts to come in and profess any weird thing that comes into their mind, and you're good to go. So we've produced a generation with a higher proportion than we like of
Well,
basically useless people. At the
yeah, and
same time, and Mike Rowe has done beautiful work pushing this idea, as has John Ratzenberger, who played Cliff on Cheers and who started his adult life as a carpenter. We're
oh
not
yeah,
emphasizing the trades anymore. I
yeah.
have a son-in-law who I was kind of pushing to go. He was worried about what he was going to do for a living. He and our daughter have 3 kids, and he did get a good job as it is, and he wanted an office job, and he did eventually get a good one. But for a while I was telling him, if you go get a welding certificate, you'll be making 70, eighty
I
thousand
keep telling my son that.
dollars. Get a welding certificate, become uh, I know of a young man who's about the age of our youngest daughter. He's in his late 20s. He's a journeyman electrician now, and he's making 6 figures.
Wow.
He's doing
Now,
great, and he lives in a little town in eastern Iowa.
I believe we need universities, but we need the high
Oh yeah,
standard universities. We need that culture you want, and I think we want more conservative people in the universities, but it needs to have those high standards. Get rid of a lot of the administration and all these kooky classes and have the high levels for lawyers, for doctors,
yeah,
engineers, that kind of stuff. You definitely need it.
yeah,
But
absolutely,
if a kid can't meet those standards, there's lots of other ways they can make money,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And they're not
Uh,
losers.
no,
It seems like they've created their own problem by encouraging all these people to go into debt, to women to go into school, to do this stuff. They created all these useless people and all this debt. And then they're like, oh no, we don't have enough people, but we want to depopulate. But let's let all these people through the border, even criminal. It's like, are you guys just stupid?
well, their debt isn't a problem because Joe is going to pay that off for them with our tax dollars.
Yeah,
That
there's
money's
The thing is you have to have been paying it for so long and only owe so much.
Yeah.
If you've only been paying it for a couple of years and you owe $60,000, Joe ain't gonna help you.
I when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, which is in biology and field zoology, uh, I had student loans. My student loans totaled $10,000
Wow,
for a 4-year degree, and I hadn't paid off in about 5 years. So I
that's
went back on
amazing.
active duty in the army. I owed them some time, and then I got out of there and went into the medical device industry and started making a decent living fairly quickly. And I wanted to get it paid off, so I paid it off.
Yeah. I
And
think
I don't know where these kids are coming up with 6 figures of college debt.
I have
How
no
the hell do you
idea.
do
A
that?
lot of them are working in Starbucks because they can't get a job in, I don't know, advertising because they realize that, oh, it takes time. They want experience. You don't just get a job because you have a degree.
Yeah, and I have very, very little sympathy for these kids that take these studies degrees and then are out there complaining they can't get a job. Like, well, what did you
Yeah.
expect was going to happen? The cure for that, and I've written on this a lot at Red State and elsewhere, um, is to decouple government from the financing of education. If a
Yeah.
kid wants to borrow money to go to college, he should have to go into his bank and say, look, here's my high school grades. I've been accepted to this university. I want to study software engineering. And a banker is going to look at him and go, well, 4.0 grade average in college or in high
Mhm.
school, and he's been accepted to Colorado School of Mines for software engineering. Boy, this is a good risk.
Yes.
But in drags a kid with purple hair and a man bun, and he says, "I want to go to Oberlin and study, gay and lesbian studies."
Yeah.
And the banker's going to say, "Goodbye,"
Well, and that's the thing.
and that would dry up those degrees. They'd
Yeah.
dry up those
They're
programs very quickly.
they're right now the degrees are worthless because you're gonna get an A regardless. They have to
Yeah,
guarantee these students an A. And I think this is where China and Russia might have a strength over us is China actually has a really good education for their
China
kids.
does. That is one of their strengths, especially in tech.
Mhm.
Uh, they and that is one hope they have for breaking out of the cycle China has of not being innovative. They copy. Their engineers
Mhm.
are really good at copying, but they're not so good at innovating. If they can
Mhm.
break that paradigm, uh, China might be a force, more of a at least more of a force to be reckoned with until their population drops off.
Yeah. And with Russia, I like about Russia, not that I like that Putin's always in control. There's good and bad things about all leaders, but what I like is at least they're pro-Russia, pro-Christian Orthodox. They're not pushing a lot of these kind of crazy stuff that harms
Yeah.
children. They're not like, "Hey, let's get all these crazy teachers in there to teach our children they can be 500 genders and confuse them." They're like,
No.
"Nope." He's literally bringing back like a civilizational thing rather
I
than communism or
Yeah.
whatever.
Although Putin, Tsar Vladimir the First, remember, is an old KGB apparatchik. He thought the
He
Soviet
is.
Union was just like Bernie Sanders. He thought the Soviet Union was pretty great. Probably in this case of Putin is because he was a privileged member of the Soviet upper crust, a colonel in
Of
the
course.
KGB. But it was interesting. I watched Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin,
Mhm.
and I watched it with some interest because Putin spoke at length about Russian history,
He did.
naming people and dates and places. The guy has an encyclopedic memory that he just rattled off about 20 minutes worth of Russian history
Mhm.
around the Black Sea and the Caucasus, and going from Kiev to Moscow to St. Petersburg, and all of the different princes and various other nobles and notable people that were involved in that. Joe Biden, he can't even remember who he just shook hands with. The comparison is amazing. I mean, he has very little understanding of what's going on at all.
No.
My colleague at Red State, Nick Arama, has made something of a specialty of pointing out Joe's failures and popping up with a video of him stumbling across a stage and calling somebody by the wrong name. One of the more recent ones, he called out the name. Oh, so and so is here, who was a captive of Hamas. Well, the person he
Mm.
called out is still a captive of Hamas. They're
He's
somewhere in
kind of
Gaza being held prisoner, and he called them. Oh, they're here. Stand up.
yeah,
It's
I
it's
know.
shameful. Um,
It's it's crazy, but As for all the stuff that America has, I have to like remind people like Russia comes, their background is literally 99% peasantry.
Hmm.
And I don't think that just goes away in 100 years. I think, and then to have like such a brutal revolution as the Russian Revolution and have that much peasantry, I don't know. I think that sticks in the culture where, and I think that's why they respond to certain things and they're
We
behind, say
we
England or whatever.
that's a big part of it. Although in the late 19th century, Russia was considered one of the great cultural spots in Europe.
Mhm. Mhm.
They had, the ballet and poetry and everything else, the
Yes,
composers. That changed in the communist era. A
it
lot of
did.
that was kind of swept aside, which is sad. Russia lost an awful lot in those
They
years
did
after the
because they
October
were,
Revolution.
I think if they had had a better czar, they put the Russian Rev, or the czar at least had capped what's his Lenin's ass and killed him before anything,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have gone through this. He had the
Uh,
opportunity to get rid of him, but he didn't.
Nicholas was he was a weak man.
Yeah, he
He
was.
became czar suddenly when his father died and wasn't really prepared for it. He
Mhm.
didn't really know what to do, and he had an uncle, and his uncle's name slips my mind at the moment. But his uncle was a very strong a man, and if he'd have been taken over when his brother died instead of having the son take over, Russia's trajectory may have been a little different. It may
Yeah,
not have been. There was a lot of unrest in Russia in
yeah,
the
there
early
was,
20th
and
century.
I mean, we're getting off track, but we're talking World War I and the Kaiser. He's partly responsible of Germany for
Hmm.
sending those little Bolsheviks in there to
Well,
create
and
all the unrest.
up
It's a lot of
in
chaos.
on the Eastern Front in 1917, a big part of the Russian army just left.
Yeah,
There's the old hippie joke about what would happen if they held a war and nobody came. Well, that's what happened. The Russian army just
yeah.
walked off the battlefield and we're going home. We're done.
See you later.
And a lot of those guys joined up with the Reds and
Yeah,
some with the white, the other side.
demoralized.
And they were very unhappy about how they'd been, sent into this meat grinder and for what? They didn't really realize anything for it.
That's right.
Americans, we had something to be proud of in World War II. My dad was a World War II veteran. His brother, my mom's brothers, all talked about it.
Hmm.
This is our country. It's our home. We were attacked.
Yeah,
We're fighting to make sure we keep our freedom. Um,
it's
and
so
I see
crazy.
too many people now that don't seem very interested in keeping America as free as it
Well,
was.
they're not interested because they've been sadly taught to hate America.
Yeah. And if
And
we
and
have
there's things not to like about America, but that's mostly the politicians' fault.
well, no country is perfect. I mean, we've had black marks in our history. Everybody
Right.
talks about slavery. It's such an obvious one. But yeah, if you look back at it from the lens of 150 years later, yeah, that's a pretty abhorrent
It's
practice.
it is, but it's at an all-time low. Like
Yeah,
it's almost non-existent racism. Like it just doesn't happen. The way they're pushing this out there that it's everywhere. Like the black, it's like yeah, it's everywhere because the CIA agents are dressing up as white supremacists
yeah.
and pretending that it's everywhere. You guys,
Things have
like this is
gotten
insane.
things have gone just the opposite direction. I remember back in there's a song I always loved in mid 70s. It was by a band called the OJs, and the song was called Love Train. And the whole song was about the OJs were, a black band. And the whole thing of the song was this love train going around the world, just picking up everybody. Climb on England, Russia, China, everybody. Africa, Israel. They mentioned Israel. Hey, Israel, climb on the love train. Everybody, we can all get along. We can all be brothers and sisters. That was the tenor
Hmm.
of the time. And now that's all just been
I
crashing.
I've studied so many cults that if someone had said that to me, hop on the love chain, I'd be like, "Where's Jim Jones
Yeah.
on your train, on your bus?
Well,
Is this
their
going?"
message was quite a bit different, and about the same time, War put out the song "Why Can't We Be Friends," which had a very similar message. And you don't hear, at least I'm not aware of
No.
anything in modern
It's not the
pop
same.
culture music that takes that tone.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff about the CIA being involved in a lot of that cultural stuff and pushing a lot of the stuff we see today. I won't get into it, but I don't think we've just come to these cultural changes just organically. I think a lot of things have been pushed on us
If the
unknowingly, very cleverly.
I can only say so much about this, but I have a
It's
very
okay.
good friend of mine who's now in his mid 70s who he was a Marine. He actually served in Vietnam, but when he left the Marine Corps after his 3 years, he went to work for the CIA. And through most of the last years of the Cold War, he was a field intelligence officer. This is a guy who was in Tehran when the embassy fell.
Right.
And he wasn't in the embassy; he was out in the streets. And he told me once, I found myself in the middle of a crowd of people. You know, I went back to the embassy, and they had the ambassador and all the staff out, blindfolded on their knees, and guys shaking AK-47s in the air. And he goes, I was in the middle of a crowd of people, shaking their fists and yelling "Death to America." And I asked him, "Well, what did you do?" He goes, "What the hell do you think I did? I started shaking my fist and yelling "Death to America." And he backed away
Right,
through the
right,
crowd, but
right.
eventually showed up at Langley like 3 weeks after that, and they looked at him and said, "We thought you were dead." But I just got an email from him the other day, within the last week or so, and he expressed a great deal of disgust with what's happened to the agency that when he was in the 70s and
Mhm,
80s, he
mhm.
felt did a lot of good work,
Right.
helping to protect the country. He goes, now it's completely come apart.
Yeah.
He's ashamed of what his agency, has become. And
It's
he,
sad.
won't offer any specifics. Most of his career, he can't even talk about.
I wouldn't ask him. I wouldn't wanna put anyone into that situation where they have, I would never ask that for sure, because that's, mostly classified stuff.
Yeah.
Alright, well, we're over the hour. It's been an awesome discussion. I just wanna kinda tie it up with, um, I mean, w would there be a positive element for developing that Pacific trade route or those trade routes around Russia and Alaska? Would there be a positive element for everybody in the world in terms of trade? Like, could it work to the benefit of other countries too? Like, would it be a good thing?
Oh, it could. It could. And a trade is good. If if
Mhm.
if Tsar Vladimir had a heart attack and somebody friendlier to the West came to power in Russia and said, "Look, I want to get our own house in order. We want to start trading with the world. We've got resources. You've got hard currency." And the same for China. I mean, she can't live forever.
Mhm.
Putin can't live
No,
forever.
I
I
think that's
always
why they're
believe that
pushing
it's
this.
and countries that do business with each other. One of the few bright
Mm.
things in our, bright spots in our relationship with China is if you look at human history, countries that do business with each other tend not to go to war
Yeah,
because nobody wants to stop the business.
that's right.
Everybody's making money and they want to keep doing it. Um, and to that extent, and also if you look at a map, and it's not just Russia and China, the Great Circle route to all of Asia from America's west coast goes right over Alaska. If you
Yes.
fly a Great Circle route from, you take an airplane, hop on at San Francisco, fly to Tokyo, you fly right over Anchorage.
Yeah.
So it's not
Very
just trade, it's
connected.
travel. And that airspace, keeping that airspace safe and copacetic is in everybody's interests.
I wanted to add, I'm going to ask you because heard you mention that Russia being more friendly. Is there a possibility that America, NATO, and European nations have escalated tensions themselves with Russia by literally, putting more NATO along the border?
Oh,
Because
I think
yeah,
there's very little doubt of that. Putin, one of
because
his
it
big
you
things
can
is he
say that.
didn't want NATO nations
Yeah,
on their border, and then they have
can you
Lithuania and
blame
now
him?
Sweden, and
Yeah,
they're making noises about Ukraine, which can't happen because NATO's charter won't allow in a country who is in an active conflict to join.
yeah.
But uh, how much do you think Putin likes us pouring billions of dollars into Ukraine? Sending Ukraine military hardware and ammunition.
It
He
He
can't like
probably
that.
doesn't. Well, no,
I'm not
I
all
wouldn't
that
blame
fond of
him.
it. I mean, our
I'm not.
nation's broke. We're 30 some $1 trillion in debt, and we're sending billions of
Yeah.
dollars to Ukraine.
Well, the
We can't afford
CIA's
it.
over there. They've been in there since 2014. I think there's a lot of more chicanery going on than what we realize.
Oh, the CIA has
And
been in Eastern Europe since
yeah,
Wild Bill Donovan's days.
yeah. But this war. like this stuff that's going on, they really started pushing and making the moves in 2014. I
Yeah.
mean, you had Burisma. Oh God, it's just a mess. So, I mean, I can't
Well,
blame, if I was Putin, I would be like on the defense too. And I know that, America wasn't very kind to Russia when the wall first fell. There was things that CIA agents did that, Russian people eventually, starved, and
yeah,
Putin was
we
their
missed a very
hero.
good
Yeah,
opportunity
we did.
at the
And
end of the
Putin
Cold
came
War.
up to be their hero. So you can kind of
Hmm.
understand where all this is coming from, because they look at him like, so a lot of them say he saved them, and he's quite popular.
Well, he's Putin, and this is going to sound very familiar, and I don't equate the two men because you can't, you shouldn't. But Putin is all about making Russia great again. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
he's going about it the right way,
Mm-hmm.
but that's his intent. He is for Russia at the expense of any other nation.
Yeah.
Russia comes first in his mind. And if you, well, Joe Biden doesn't have anything in his mind besides his next pudding cup. But the people in his administration, they don't care. They're not they talk a good game about being patriots, but they're not by my definition. They
No,
don't seek American interests above and beyond anything else in any other country in the world. Countries don't have permanent allies; they only have permanent interests. And an American president should have America's interests at heart before anything else. And
that's
that's a
right.
big part of Donald Trump's appeal. I really
Exactly.
believe I was very skeptical about him in 2016. Yeah, I was an old Reagan Republican. Matter of fact, my first political campaign was 1980. I was a Reagan campaign volunteer. I was 18 years old. I passed out pamphlets and bumper stickers. And Reagan had America's interests always first in his mind. Trump does. Biden, I don't think Barack Obama did.
No,
Uh,
no.
Barack
Barack
Obama
Obama's like
fancied
Muslim
himself some kind of,
Brotherhood,
yeah,
cocaine, and
cosmopolitan citizen of the world.
blowjobs.
And Biden is non compos mentis. I
Yeah.
don't blame him for that because I don't think he's capable.
He's just a corrupt politician. He's basically but Obama's puppet.
Yeah.
Boom.
Well, I think Jill is the primary one that's driving him right now. She
That's
seems to
that
really
is
like the trappings of
scary.
power.
That is scary. That old she looks like a potato sack. Oh my God.
Mm,
All right.
that's suitable because
Well,
Jill looks like a potato.
well, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully, you will come on again and do
Sure.
politics in the future. That was really fantastic. I really appreciate it. I hope our audience appreciate it. You guys want to check out Ward's stuff on Red State. He's at redstate.com/author/Ward Clark. He's also on X as The Great Lander. You can find him there. He also is on Rumble, and it was a number. But if it
Yeah,
was a number, so I didn't put it up. But
I have to fix that, but
if you go to his Red State site, I believe his Rumble channel is linked there, so you can go
it is.
subscribe on that.
It
Awesome.
is.
Well, I'm gonna pop you out here, and you can stay in the green room if you want, or you can just leave. And I'm just gonna tie up the show. I thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Melissa. It was really fun.
All right. Awesome. All right, everybody. I am not going to be too much longer. No show tomorrow that I know of. There might be a Beast System with Emily. If it is, I'll stream it on X. So make sure to follow me, guys, on X. You just easiest thing to do is to go to genxnewsx.com. All my links there. You can follow me on X, also streaming on YouTube, streaming on Rumble. You're gonna want to get on there. There's my Rumble channel. Subscribe there. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I hope that was an interesting discussion. I mean, it's sad. Our biggest problem, which we've been encouraged to do, is population. Population decrease is going to actually be the big problem. I think Elon Musk is right. He keeps saying this. I actually agree with him. And it's going to be China's problem, and it's going to be Russia's problem, and it's going to be huge. By 2050, China's going to have some serious, serious population issues going on if they don't have more kids. So, anyways, I want to thank you guys for showing up. I'm going to sign out. Be sure to subscribe, share this content, like this content, repost, and if you are listening to us on the audio podcast platforms. 5 stars. It helps us show up in the charts. Thank you guys so much. We will see you on Friday, Tinfoil Hat Friday. Oh, Tinfoil Hat Friday, King Charles, Vlad Dracula, World Dracula Day. We're going to be there with our tinfoil